Alright, everyone. This video is on Venus, and what I want to do now is focus specifically on this phase that we're in for the next few weeks as Venus begins to slow down to a complete stop. And then she begins moving retrograde at, I think, 10 degrees Scorpio. I want to start by reviewing just this one thing that I've said a zillion times, just what is retrograde? So when any planet goes retrograde, you can think of whatever that planetary function represents within consciousness. There is a shifting happening where our conditioned relationship to that planetary function within us, in life, is coming up for review. So in every aspect of our lives, we have our conditioned patterns. And beyond our conditioned patterns, there's the patterning of life, what we tend to attract, right? The experience we tend to resonate with, the kinds of relationships we tend to get into, the behaviors that we bring into our life of the people that come into our life, not much, as well as the behaviors that we tend to exhibit. In a way, we can look at every part of our life, and if we assume a situation of non-growth, everything's kind of predictable. Life is a thermostat relative to our own experience, and our psychology is a thermostat. We revert to set patterns. And when retrograde happens, it's like this mechanism within consciousness to not become complacent. That's just one fun way of thinking of it. So we become reflective. Psychologically, we start to review. Something within us is turning inward. And in life, we see that happening as well. Anytime a planet goes retrograde, there are generally two ways to be in relationship to it. To try to live the way we're used to, which will then usually bring up a lot of confrontations, challenges, surprises, things not working out well, people not working out well, etc. Or we embrace the flow of the cosmos, this particular cycle, and we allow ourselves to go inward, reflect, review, revisit. So the retrograde time, any planet, has its own potential to bring more self-knowledge, retreating from the conditioned patterns of our life. And so what's a Venus all about? Venus is relationship. Jeffrey Wolf Green beautifully taught that Venus corresponds to the psychology of listening. Mercury, the physiology of hearing. Venus, the psychology of listening. The psychology of listening, right? Are you listening? And Venus has two aspects to it, inner and outer. Inner ear, listening to our body, our values, our needs. So Venus is survival, basic biological human needs, food, water, shelter, senses, our ability to feel. And then outer listening. A part of this whole mechanism of consciousness is manifesting as all of us. And while it's all inside, it's like an absolute truth, there's this piece where I'm going to learn something about myself by connecting with you. I'm going to be drawn to relationships some way or another, somehow or another. And I'm going to find out more about myself. And so there's this whole relational journey that we all go on. Learning how to give, learning how to ask for what we need, understanding what are our needs. And so we come into all kinds of relationships. Different, Venus relationships isn't necessarily like marriage or partnership. It's just relationship in general. And we give each other what we need. We learn how to meet one another. And in this way, the many is sort of turning towards itself. Like, oh, you. And we're forming love, right? We're forming like, I like you, I like being around you. And these are conditional expressions of love. It's, this really works for me. This form of relationship really works for me. And we do this in so many ways in our lives. And if there's harmony and balance, it's a state where each individual soul is a fully conscious participant in the exchange. And there's a sense of relevancy. I always like to use the example for Venus. It's like, you know, a magnet sitting on a shelf, right? Just like it holds itself. And if you think of the glyph for Venus, cross, which is matter, physical form, circle on top of it, spirit. So Venus represents the circle, which is formless, timeless, infinite grace, beauty, inherent harmony, right? Resting on matter, infusing itself in form. So the Venus function, if you really look at it deeply, is how we all come into the state of balance and harmony within and without. And we know what it's like to be in a relationship that isn't in balance, isn't in harmony. Venus corresponds to the idea of expectations. Right? So we can project expectations, needs, ideas, and wants that aren't in harmony with what's actually happening, with what's actually available. We can do that with ourselves. We can load our senses or deprive our senses, not be in a state of balance and harmony. So harmony and balance can't be qualified by any particular measure. I mean, perhaps you can look at sacred geometry and kind of get into the mathematics of it. I'm open to that. But if you want to look at it with the heart, there's a resonance with the feeling and the sensation of harmony and balance. It is not, you gave me this much and I'm going to give you this much. That is a mental conception of that. And sometimes, according to the agreement or the contract, that's a relevant thing, right? If you're, buying something with money, you want to be in balance with the exchange of values and resources, etc. But when it comes to our inner notion of value, it can't really be given a price. Conditionally, in a context, you can say this service costs this much, or this item, or this relationship, this is the agreement, this is the context. But the essence of value, the essence of our own inner value, and the value and the beauty of what we are and what life is, it's not quantifiable. It doesn't have a price. It doesn't have a quantity to it at all. So we hold respect for that. We appreciate that more absolute understanding that value is inherent to life. It's inherent to who we are. And then we engage in all these different forms of relationship to remember that we are not defined by our physical reality, by the relationships, by the things that we're getting from others, by how loved we are, how much we get our needs met. These are conditional, temporary expressions. And this takes me into Scorpio. I love speaking about Scorpio. Scorpio says everything that comes also goes. It's impermanence. And one thing that we learn on the Scorpio journey is that on this path of soul evolution, we form relationship and connect to the 1,000 things of this ephemeral creation. But each time we make that connection, from the point of view of Scorpio, we're finding more of our power inside of ourselves. And this power is the power of our soul, of our timeless essence. The soul is sovereign. It does not have a gender. It does not have a mother or a father. It does not have a lover, a child, anything. The soul is inherently whole unto itself. And yet we come into the sense of, I need something more, I'm drawn to, and we come into incarnation with the sense of, I need to have these kinds of experiences. There's more for me out there that I'm drawn, impelled to merge with, to connect with. We take that into Venus and Scorpio. It's sexually. We're drawn from a deep place inside of ourselves on a deep emotional level, psychological level, sexual level. We are impelled and drawn to a greater depth of connection. We are wanting to awaken to something inside of ourselves. So Venus and Scorpio is going to represent, on one level, really strong attraction. Right? We're drawn to something that says there is a power inside of ourselves that we want to access. And we cannot sit in our seat and just be like, okay, I am desiring deeper intimacy, deeper connection. I want to be wanted. I want to be seen. I want to be heard. I want to be cherished. Okay, I'm just going to think about that. It doesn't work that way. We incarnate to play out the journey. There is a surrendering and a harmonizing with the template of our existence. And evolution says you have to go with it. And there comes a point, cyclically, that we release whatever it is we're exploring. Caterpillar, chrysalis, right? It has to collect the material, build the chrysalis, go through the whole phase, and then become the butterfly. You can't just sit there and be like, I am butterfly. It's conceptually maybe get it on some level, but we have to move through evolutionary process. And that's what we call evolutionary necessity. There's a quality to this existence that may not be known by the conscious mind, but is a sort of soul level requirement to play this out. And each one of us has a program. That program is not necessarily easy, and not all programs are created equally. But when we get into Scorpio world, it's really about cooperate with it or resist it. Now, the challenges with Venus and Scorpio, and we'll come into the retrograde in a moment, says this: you're drawn to commit, Scorpio. I'm going to do this. I'm going to get involved with this person, place, thing, whatever. This way of being, to get to know myself. And yet there can be an inherent disembodiment that occurs. No, Scorpio is embodiment. Sorry, Venus is embodiment. Scorpio is desire. So our desires can literally take us out of our sense of self. The opposite sign to Scorpio is Taurus. We'll talk about that because Uranus is right there in Taurus, opposing Venus during this whole retrograde time. So there's a challenge with Venus and Scorpio of being impelled by our desire, and it becomes an obsession, a compulsion, a sense of I need more, I need to jump and direct all of my psychological energy outside of myself. And this can become addictive. Addiction can become a subtle, integrated way of being, where it's not necessarily like loud and screaming and chaotic and dysfunctional. There's garden variety addiction, and in a sense we all relate to a garden variety addiction, where it's just sort of status quo. It's normal to be outside of ourselves. And we can put that into a relationship. I'm really needing you to act this way towards me, or I'm really needing relationships where I'm wanted and connected with in this way. Venus and Scorpio, especially as it begins to move retrograde, really invites us to look at where are we bound, enslaved really, to addictive patterns of being outside of ourselves. Who do we seek? Who do we attract? What kind of person do we come into relationship with? Whether you're married in a committed relationship and you're living in a little hut by yourself and you don't see anyone, or if you're exploring the whole world, what's there? What recurs? And what are the needs that are met or unmet that you're seeking to meet? We all have this subtle compulsive pattern of, I need this to be met. I'm needing to be met in this way. And yet if we're not embodying our desire, then desire is literally like a dog on a leash that's in front of us, and it's kind of pushing us forward, moving us, boom, right? We're not in control. And yet try controlling a dog on a leash that's just kind of all over the place. You can't. Venus in Scorpio teaches us, in embodying our desire, we claim it, we own it, we become one with it. As Venus moves retrograde, we're invited to look at, where are we outside of ourselves? Where do we now have this opportunity, in a sense, to kill, release, let go of the obsessions, compulsions with the external objects of our life? Because one way or another, it will go. It will fall away. It will die. We will die. We will lose it. And this is a window where there's a ripe opportunity to do this inner work of release. It doesn't mean get out of the relationship. It doesn't mean change anything necessarily. But psychologically, in the present moment, coming into ourself, we can, in a sense, let ourselves die. We can let everything fall away as if we were dying and leaving this world, leaving this incarnation. We can inwardly orient to that state of, it's no longer with us. And we do that by simply becoming one with the inner sensations of our inner reality. The wanting, the desiring, the hating, the feeling of being taken advantage of, the feeling of wanting more, the obsession. No judgment on any of it, but these are Venus sensations. Venus, we feel it. We allow ourselves to feel it. And one thing that we learn in Scorpio is that the soul is the program for our entire reality. It's what brings us into incarnation. And moment to moment, our inner program is the basis for the entirety of our reality. Our inner program runs deep. So we don't necessarily know the power of our agency to operate on the level of the programmer, because for the most part we're operating on the level of conscious ego structure, not aware of the soul essence, the programmer behind this whole reality. By marrying, by merging with the inner sensations, the desire, the wanting, we actually begin to energetically shift the otherwise unconscious patterning of our life. And then, this is where it gets really interesting. As Venus moves retrograde in Scorpio, we don't just sort of invert and shift and become more psychologically self-aware, which is really a great time for doing that. The people that show up in our life shifts, relationships can shift. And we've been preparing for this for a while, with Mars and Uranus squaring each other in the past month in particular, as Venus has been slowing down and squaring Mars. So we've been in this window, but now it's really getting intense. The Scorpio in me smiles at that. This is a time that we're now coming into where relationships, how we're relating to one another, patterns of, I've been with this person for however many years, it's maybe working well, right? We have good sex or mediocre sex, we meet each other's needs, we have this whole life, but there might be something deep, deep, deep inside of you that's actually wanting to be touched. Venus is also touch. In the same way that Venus is a psychology of listening, we can touch someone with listening. Right? If you ever got a really good massage or just touched well, you know what it's like for someone to touch you or to touch someone when you're listening. Right? It's not a mental listening. There's a part of us that might really want to be touched in the heart, and Venus is a heart chakra, so it's like, when we're touched, we're seen, like we're met where we are. And there's no judgment in the heart. There's no judgment there. There's a sense of permission, of allowance. And that's scary. Because in Scorpio, there's a lot in there. We have to feel trust. To let our guard down and let the emotions, sensations, the jadedness, the distrust, the fears, the guardedness, to allow that in. We have to feel safe. We have to trust. And yet if we hold up that wall of, we can play this game forever of like, I'm not going to open up around you, or I don't trust life, or no one can meet me. And we're just kind of staying stuck in that jaded reality. But to meet that, I'm really jaded, or I feel distrustful, right? Or I'm really wanting more, and I tend to give myself and open myself to people that can't meet me. Notice the relationship patterns. We all have them. I'm like toying with, do I want to talk about my own? Maybe. Let's see. It's nice to give my chart as an example sometimes, but then when you have that much Scorpio in your chart, sometimes you just gotta keep some things private. So a thing to be mindful of is perpetuating conflict, right? Kind of sticking the dagger and perpetuating the sense of, needing more where it's not giving. We are held and safe and supported during this time truly to go more inside and to see when we stand in our power, we resonate with our own inherent wholeness and sovereignty, which is another way of saying letting go of the outer. Who remains? Who goes? Who do we find ourselves naturally, inherently impelled to? Who naturally just shows up in our sphere? The resonance of our inner point of attraction is powerful. Again, we don't understand this for the most part because we don't tend to operate on the level of the programmer, on the level of soul. But the more we orient to our inner reality, we start to see that, wow, we are truly in a co-creative, very interactive relationship with all of life around us. So this Venus retrograde can bring really relevant, powerful, permeating relationship connections in our life. And it's the shadow stuff, our deeper desires, our deeper wants, everything. So it's an interesting journey, and we're in it. Venus is squaring Mars in Aquarius. There's this other element of hypersynchronicity. Whenever you bring Aquarius and Uranus in, it really emphasizes the state of everything can feel like a synchronicity. And I want to offer this perspective. When we're less and less bound by a reactive, obsessive orienting to reality, we start to become almost like bit by bit, subtly aware of what's actually happening. What's actually happening? Who are these people? Where are they going? What's their natural place in my life? We can allow the harmony, the balance of everything to kind of just fall into place. It's like, oh, this interesting combination, this is what is here. I didn't expect that necessarily. But here, these needs are being met. I'm accessing something deeper in myself. Another piece I want to speak to is when we don't share and circulate our inner resources, our inner abundance, which is, a Venus thing. And circulation, by the way, is a Scorpio. Everything needs to regenerate. Everything needs to compost and move and cycle. It creates an intense psychological stagnation, emotional stagnation. Venus moving retrograde in Scorpio says, wherever you're outside of yourself is exactly where you are not giving of yourself. It's a powerful teaching in this Venus archetype when it moves through Scorpio, that by coming into ourself, we realize that we have energy to give. We need to circulate it. So there are crude resources, untapped power that wants to express itself. And I very, very often observe within the Scorpio archetype, for myself and for everyone that I work with, the more we hold ourselves back from showing up in our power, the more that is then translated or converted into a deep need. So it's like through giving, we find out what we have. And in fact, through giving, which exemplifies our wholeness, we resonate that. And then we're met on a deeper level. That's the paradox with Venus, by the way. It's our inner wholeness, it's our inner relationship to self, and then it's like, I need relationships. Bring them together. When we keep ourselves in a vacuum, we don't allow our essence to be seen. Venus is pheromones, by the way. It's our voice, it's our heart. So that reminds me of a song that I haven't thought of in a while, but I'm going to share in the video with this. Fill me up so I may give. I may give so I may live in emptiness and certainty, confident in what I be. Fill me up so I may give. I may give so I may live in emptiness and certainty, confident in all I be. Giving is the way to find what you've got. You're rich inside, so let it go that you may see all the wealth that lives in thee. So let it go that you may see all the wealth that lives in thee. All right, everyone. Much love, grace, embodiment, depth, meaning for us all. Much love.